The easiest answer is that Homo sapiens killed them. We arrived with better weapons, better language, wider social networks, and a more flexible mind. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, and the other human lineages could not compete. One by one, they were pushed aside until the planet belonged to us. It is a powerful story. It may also be dangerously simple. There is no single archaeological layer showing one global human conquest. The last known populations of Homo erectus disappeared long before Neanderthals. Island humans faced pressures unlike those of Ice Age Europe. Some groups overlapped with Homo sapiens. Some exchanged genes with us. Others may have vanished before our species could have played any direct role at all. Their disappearance may have involved climate instability, shrinking populations, competition, disease, demographic chance, and genetic absorption. In that kind of collapse, there may be no final battle. Only fewer births, emptier camps, broken migration routes, and one winter after which nobody returns. So, why are we the only human lineage left? The answer may reveal less about our superiority than about how fragile every human world has always been. The first answer is that there was no single disappearance. The phrase other human species makes the past sound neatly divided, as if each kind of human occupied its own branch until one branch was cut away. The real picture is less orderly. Researchers still debate where some species boundaries should be drawn, especially when populations could meet and produce children. But the broader fact is clear. For much of the Pleistocene, our genus contained several distinct human lineages. The fossil record is too incomplete to reconstruct the fate of every named human species. The clearest test comes from the last surviving lineages whose final traces can still be dated. They did not all vanish together. At Ngandong on the island of Java, the last known Homo erectus fossils date to roughly 117,000 to 108,000 years ago. On Flores, the known remains of Homo floresiensis end around 60,000 years ago, while stone tools continue later. On Luzon, Homo luzonensis is known from a small collection of bones and teeth tens of thousands of years old. Neanderthals remained across parts of Eurasia until roughly 40,000 years ago. Denisovan remains are still rare, but discoveries now link this lineage to Siberia, the Tibetan Plateau, Taiwan, and northeastern China. Their geographic range is becoming clearer. The timing and cause of their final disappearance are not. These are not chapters of one extinction event. They are separate endings spread across islands, forests, mountains, and ice age plains. The most defensible answer, then, is not one cause, but several forces working in different combinations. Changing climates, shrinking habitats, small populations, competition for resources, disease, interbreeding, and simple demographic bad luck. One lineage might lose its water source. Another might become isolated. Another might be absorbed into a larger population until its distinct form no longer remained. But if every disappearance followed a different path, why does the same suspect keep appearing in the story? Why do so many endings seem to gather around the expansion of Homo sapiens? The simplest story survives because it feels like evolution should have a winner. Homo sapiens arrived with lighter tools, sharper weapons, richer language, longer trade routes, and a mind better able to adapt. Neanderthals could survive the cold, but not us. In this version, intelligence becomes a weapon, and extinction becomes the final score. Some parts of that argument may be true. Early Homo sapiens populations often carried technologies and social connections that could have helped them move between environments, recover from losses, and share information across distance. Even a small advantage, repeated over thousands of years, could matter. But Neanderthals were not helpless brutes waiting to be replaced. They shaped stone with precision. They attached tools to handles with natural adhesives. They hunted dangerous animals, controlled fire, and survived repeated climatic swings across Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years. Some sites also preserve pigments, ornaments, and engraved objects that many researchers interpret as evidence of symbolic behavior. The categories are not clean enough for a simple contest between intelligence and failure. Nor did replacement happen the moment Homo sapiens appeared. In parts of Europe, the two lineages overlapped for thousands of years. They entered some of the same landscapes, used some of the same resources, and, as genetics later revealed, sometimes had children together. So, Homo sapiens may have increased the pressure. Larger networks, faster population growth, or greater ecological flexibility may have changed the balance. But survival alone does not tell us which species was smarter. It only tells us which population was still reproducing at the end. To see how little pressure that may require, we have to enter one of the last Neanderthal worlds. But what does a vulnerable population look like when it is still alive? Around 54,000 years ago, Neanderthals used Chagirskaya Cave in the foothills of the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia. The cave overlooked river valleys crossed by ibex, horses, and bison. Hunters carried stone raw material from tens of kilometers away, then returned to a shelter filled with tools, butchered animal bones, and the ordinary debris of repeated visits. What remained in the cave was not only evidence of hunting. It was a rare genetic portrait of a community. Researchers recovered DNA from 13 Neanderthals across Chagirskaya and nearby Okladnikov Cave, 11 of them from Chagirskaya. Among the Chagirskaya individuals was a father and his teenage daughter. Another young boy was related to an adult woman, perhaps as a grandson, nephew, or cousin. Shared genetic variants suggest that at least some of these people lived at roughly the same time. The most unsettling clue was not their relationship, it was their scale. Long stretches of matching DNA showed that the Chagirskaya Neanderthals belonged to a small, closely related community. Genetic modeling was consistent with a local group of perhaps 10 to 20 people. The diversity of maternal DNA was much greater than the diversity of Y chromosomes, suggesting that women more often moved between communities while men tended to remain with their birth group. This was not total isolation. People, stone, and genes still moved across the landscape, but the margin for loss may have been narrow. In a community that small, the death of two hunters is not only grief. It is lost food, knowledge, protection, and future children. A failed season does not need to kill everyone. It only needs to leave too few survivors, too few partners, or too little connection for the group to rebuild. Chagirskaya cannot stand for every Neanderthal community across Eurasia. The researchers themselves caution that this isolated eastern population may have been unusually small, but it reveals one route to vulnerability. Homo sapiens did not need to defeat every Neanderthal in battle. A larger or more connected population only had to recover from losses that a smaller community could not. Chagirskaya shows one vulnerable community, not a universal Neanderthal condition. But it leaves another question unanswered. Why did Neanderthal disappearance still occur so close to the expansion of another kind of human? Then the most tempting story moves to an island. At Liang Bua, a limestone cave on Flores in Indonesia, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a human unlike any living today. Homo floresiensis stood only a little over a meter tall. Its world included giant rats, large birds, and a small island elephant called Stegodon. Stone tools lay through the cave deposits, evidence that this was not a brief accident of survival, but a long human presence. For years, the ending seemed almost irresistible. The hobbits survived until modern humans entered the region. Then, they disappeared. But the dates changed. Revised excavations showed that the known Homo floresiensis bones date from roughly 100,000 to 60,000 years ago. Stone artifacts likely associated with them continue to about 50,000 years ago. The clearest evidence for Homo sapiens at Liang Bua appears later, around 46,000 years ago. That leaves no confirmed overlap inside the cave, and no layer preserving a final confrontation. The absence of evidence is not proof that the two populations never met elsewhere on Flores. Homo sapiens may still have brought competition, new diseases, or other pressures. But proximity on a timeline is not a murder weapon. A newer clue comes not from bones, but from rainfall trapped inside a nearby stalagmite. The record suggests that annual rainfall declined sharply between about 76,000 and 61,000 years ago. The driest phase coincided with the last known Homo floresiensis remains at Liang Bua and the decline of Stegodon, an animal that may have been an important food source. Water scarcity could have pushed both prey and people away from the cave or weakened a population already living within narrow ecological limits. This does not prove that drought caused their extinction. It shows something more useful. The environment was changing at the same moment their archaeological presence faded. The beautiful story of a final encounter remains possible. It is simply not yet the safest conclusion. And then there is a human lineage that seems to have vanished before Homo sapiens could even be placed at the scene. The next clue comes from a river terrace on Java. Between 1931 and 1933, excavators at Ngandong recovered 12 Homo erectus skullcaps and 2 lower leg bones from a fossil-rich layer above the Solo River. After decades of disputed dates, researchers built a chronology from 52 radiometric age estimates. The result placed the bone bed between roughly 117,000 and 108,000 years ago, the youngest securely dated occurrence of Homo erectus currently known. The fossils accumulated during flooding, so they do not preserve a village, a last family, or the exact moment the lineage ended. Nor do they tell us why Homo erectus disappeared. But their age matters. At Ngandong, the known record fades long before the disappearance of Neanderthals, and before any clear evidence places Homo sapiens on Java as the direct cause. There is no need to imagine one expanding army of modern humans erasing every branch. Farther north, another island preserves an even smaller fragment of the story. In Kalau Cave on Luzon, researchers found teeth, hand, and foot bones, and part of a thigh bone representing at least 3 individuals. Their unusual mixture of anatomical features led to the naming of Homo luzonensis. One foot bone was dated to about 67,000 years ago. Other remains from the same deposits are more than 50,000 years old. That is almost everything we have. We do not know when Homo luzonensis first appeared, how numerous they were, whether they met Homo sapiens, or when their final population vanished. The evidence is powerful because it reveals another kind of human. It is weak as an extinction story because the final chapters are missing. Ngandong and Callao do not give us one answer. They remove one. The Pleistocene world held human populations in river valleys, forests, cold plains, and isolated islands. Different environments created different risks. But across these cases, one vulnerability keeps returning. When a population becomes small and disconnected, even ordinary losses can become permanent. A population can disappear while nearly every individual still looks capable of survival. Imagine a community of 30 people. The adults know where water returns after the dry season. They can shape stone, track animals, treat injuries, and keep children alive through cold nights. Nothing about them appears doomed. Then one hunter dies in a fall. A second adult is injured and can no longer travel far. 2 infants do not survive the winter. A young woman leaves to join another group, while no new partner arrives in her place. An older toolmaker dies before fully passing on a difficult technique. The following year, the animals move beyond the group's familiar hunting range. No single event destroys the community. But the balance begins to shift. Small populations are vulnerable because every birth, death, and migration carries unusual weight. With too few unrelated partners, close kinship can increase. With too few adults, childcare and food gathering become harder. If a group divides, both new groups may become too small to remain stable. Even healthy individuals can find themselves inside a population that no longer produces enough surviving children to replace the people it loses. This is demographic extinction. It leaves no battlefield, and may leave no obvious catastrophe in the ground. Archaeologists may see only fewer tools, shorter occupations, and finally an empty layer where people once returned. The mechanism does not require every Neanderthal, Homo erectus, or island human to become weak. It requires only that losses continue faster than recovery. Climate stress, accidents, disease, competition, and isolation can each push the same fragile balance in the wrong direction. But small populations had always faced danger. Homo sapiens did too. The deeper question is what happened when one isolated community met a human population connected to many others. Now, place that small community inside a bad year. The cold arrives early. Snow covers the valley before the herds complete their usual migration. Tracks that once led toward ibex and horse now end at frozen ground. The group must travel farther, burn more energy, and leave injured or elderly members behind for longer periods. Across the valley, another band begins using the same shelter route. They do not need to attack. They only need to reach the carcass first, collect the best stone before it is gone, or occupy the cave when a storm closes the mountain pass. Competition can happen without hatred and without a single weapon raised between the groups. On an island, the pressure might look different. A spring fails after several dry seasons. Stegodon move farther from the cave. The shoreline changes. A storm destroys a familiar crossing. The result is the same: less food, less water, longer journeys, and more chances for injury. None of these problems alone must be fatal. That is the dangerous part. Climate stress reduces food. Poor nutrition lowers fertility and weakens recovery. Injury removes labor. Isolation limits partners. A larger neighboring population absorbs territory, resources, or people. Disease, if it arrives, finds a community already operating without a margin. Extinction may begin not with one disaster, but with several ordinary pressures arriving close together. Homo sapiens also faced hunger, cold, injury, and failed seasons. Our bodies were not protected from the same world. So perhaps the decisive advantage was not simply what one person could endure. Perhaps it was how many other people could help when one community failed. The next advantage may not have lived inside a single skull. Imagine the same failed winter striking two populations. One community is largely alone. The other belongs to a wider web of camps, able to move partners, materials, and information across distance. That difference is network resilience. Archaeology cannot map every friendship or marriage, but it can sometimes trace the movement of materials. In Eastern Africa, near the time our species was emerging, obsidian and pigments were transported across distances far beyond one local camp. Much later, genomes from the roughly 34,000-year-old site of Sungir show that people living in a small population had limited close kinship and low inbreeding, consistent with residential groups connected to a wider mating network. The contrast with Neanderthals should not be exaggerated. Recent genomes from late Neanderthals in Belgium and France show no close relative mating patterns like those found in the Altai and instead suggest larger or better connected regional populations. Neanderthals also moved between groups and carried raw materials across landscapes. The possible difference was not connection versus isolation everywhere. It was scale, density, and redundancy in particular regions. A population spread across many connected communities does not need every group to survive. One camp can fail while the larger network continues. Skills can be relearned. Partners can arrive. Territory can be reoccupied. Population losses can be replaced from somewhere beyond the horizon. Homo sapiens may not have been better at every hunt, every winter, or every tool. But if more of our communities remained connected, then local disaster was less likely to become permanent extinction. The decisive unit of survival may not have been the individual human. It may have been the network. But expansion through networks creates another, darker question. What happened when those connections entered landscapes already occupied by other humans? Contact between human lineages was not one thing. When Homo sapiens entered landscapes already occupied by Neanderthals, the meetings may have ranged from avoidance to exchange, from competition to violence, and from brief encounters to families. Archaeology rarely preserves enough detail to tell these possibilities apart. A better connected population could take over hunting grounds without organizing a war. It could occupy the safest shelters more often, draw animals toward different routes, or bring unfamiliar pathogens into communities with little immunity. Local violence may also have occurred, but a wounded bone cannot identify the attacker, and no evidence currently demonstrates a coordinated campaign to eliminate Neanderthals across Eurasia. Then genetics changes the scene again. From Denisova cave in Siberia came a small bone fragment belonging to an adolescent girl known as Denisova 11. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan, and even he carried older Neanderthal ancestry. She was not a theoretical mixture reconstructed from distant descendants. She was the first-generation child of two human lineages. Homo sapiens also interbred repeatedly with Neanderthals. Some early modern humans had Neanderthal ancestors only a few generations before they lived. Contact, then, did not produce only replacement. It also produced descendants. This makes disappearance harder to define. A small population can lose its territory and cultural continuity, while some of its ancestry passes into a larger one. One recent mathematical model suggests that recurrent immigration and interbreeding could, in principle, dilute a distinct Neanderthal population over thousands of years. But genetic absorption was probably uneven, not a single process operating in the same way across Eurasia. But absorption should not be romanticized. DNA cannot tell us whether every encounter was peaceful, equal, or voluntary. The evidence reveals mixture. It does not recover the human circumstances behind it. So when a lineage vanished as a separate population but continued inside another, what exactly disappeared? Now look into a mirror. The face looking back belongs to Homo sapiens. but parts of its genetic history came from humans who no longer exist as separate populations. Most people with substantial ancestry outside Africa carry a small proportion of DNA inherited from Neanderthals. Denisovan ancestry is distributed differently. It appears at lower levels across parts of Asia and reaches its highest known proportions in some populations of Oceania, including Papuan groups. These fragments are not miniature Neanderthals or Denisovans hidden inside us. They are pieces of inherited sequence, broken apart and reshuffled across thousands of generations. Many archaic variants disappeared. Others remain by chance. Some appear to have been favored by natural selection in particular environments. But it is dangerous to turn that inheritance into a simple list of Neanderthal traits. Modern biology is shaped by many genes, environments, and histories acting together. Still, the genetic evidence changes what extinction means. Neanderthals no longer maintain their own communities, traditions, territories, or independent future. Denisovans no longer exist as a population we can meet. Those human worlds ended. Yet their biological history was not erased. It entered the descendants of other people and continued, fragmented, inside a much larger population. So what disappeared was more than a body type or a branch on a family tree. It was a distinct way of being human. Relationships, knowledge, voices, and local memories that DNA cannot reconstruct. The modern mirror therefore shows both survival and loss. We are the only human lineage still building cities, burying the dead, and asking what happened to the others. But we are not standing entirely alone. The easiest answer was that Homo sapiens killed them. The evidence leaves us with something less dramatic and more unsettling. There was no single ending. Some human lineages faced changing climates and shrinking habitats. Some lived in populations too small to recover from repeated losses. Some may have been pushed aside by competition. Others were divided by distance, trapped within islands, or absorbed through interbreeding into larger populations. Homo sapiens probably mattered in several of these endings. Our expansion changed landscapes already occupied by other humans. But we were not present at every disappearance, and no single advantage explains why all the others vanished. What survived may have been less a superior body or a uniquely brilliant mind than a population able to remain large, mobile, and connected. Even then, survival was never guaranteed. Our own lineage passed through bottlenecks, migrations, failed communities, and environments that could easily have ended differently. Imagine the world again as scattered fires in the dark. For hundreds of thousands of years, more than one kind of human sat beside them. Each fire held its own relationships, skills, memories, and way of understanding the night. Some faded slowly. Some were absorbed into others. Some disappeared so completely that only a tooth, a skull fragment, or a sequence of DNA remained. Today, one fire is still burning. That does not prove every other human was inferior. It only means ours was the fire that remained after the others went dark.